Are grown-ups allowed to cry in public?
The question came from a 7-year-old girl holding a worn-out teddy bear in the middle of Denver International Airport. Julian Cross froze. Just seconds earlier, the widowed CEO of Aurelia Air had turned toward the window, hoping no one would notice him wiping his eyes after a call from the hospital. His father might not survive the night. Outside, a snowstorm had grounded hundreds of flights. Inside, angry passengers were shouting his airline's name like a curse. Julian could manage billion-dollar routes, international crises, and rooms full of executives who feared him. But he couldn't make one plane leave fast enough to reach the man who'd never forgiven him. The little girl didn't know he was powerful. She didn't know his wife had died 3 years ago. She didn't know he'd spent every day since then pretending grief was something successful men outgrew. She only saw a grown man trying to cry quietly. So she offered him a crumpled tissue and asked the one question no adult in that airport dared to ask: Are grown-ups allowed to cry in public? Julian looked at the child, then at her exhausted young mother standing behind her, and for the first time in 3 years, he didn't say, "I'm fine." Are grown-ups allowed to cry in public? The question was small, but it cut cleanly through the noise of the Denver airport lounge. Julian Cross didn't turn around at first. He sat near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the business-class waiting area, facing the white blur of snow outside. Beyond the glass, grounded planes sat under layers of ice, their wings still and useless. Inside, flight boards flashed the same word again and again: delayed, canceled, delayed. The storm had turned Denver International Airport into a maze of tired bodies, ringing phones, crying babies, and frustrated travelers arguing with gate agents who hadn't slept enough to deserve the anger thrown at them. Julian knew that better than anyone. Aurelia Air was his company. Every canceled flight, every missed connection, every stranded passenger somehow carried his name, even if most of the people shouting it had no idea he was sitting 20 feet away from them, dressed in a charcoal suit, one hand gripping his phone, the other pressed against his mouth. The call from Boston had lasted only 3 minutes. "Mr. Cross," the doctor had said gently, which was always how bad news arrived. "Your father's condition is declining faster than we expected. He's been asking for you." Julian had closed his eyes. "Is he conscious, on and off? Did he say anything else?" A pause. He asked if Julian was coming. That was when something inside him gave way. Not loudly. Julian Cross didn't break loudly. He'd built an entire life around quiet damage. He turned toward the window, lowered his head, and wiped one tear before it could fall properly. But Eleanor Parker saw it. Ellie was 7 years old, small for her age, with a worn teddy bear tucked under one arm and a red marker stain on her thumb. She and her mother had been placed in the business lounge by accident after a booking error, a miracle so minor it had mostly made Maya Parker suspicious. Maya, 28, an emergency room nurse from Denver, sat 2 chairs away. She was trying to read a text from her estranged husband while pretending her hands weren't shaking from exhaustion. She was flying to Boston because her own father was sick, because life had a cruel sense of timing, and because Ellie had started asking whether people in hospitals always came home. Ellie'd been watching Julian for almost a full minute. Then she slipped from her chair and walked over. "Are grown-ups allowed to cry in public?" she asked. Julian went still. Maya's head snapped up. "Ellie," she whispered, horrified. "Honey, come back here. I'm so sorry, sir." But Julian didn't look angry. He looked as if the child had asked him a question he should have answered years ago. He glanced down at her teddy bear, then at her serious little face. "I'm not sure," he said quietly. "I've been trying not to for years." Ellie considered this. "My mom cries in the bathroom sometimes," she said. "She thinks I can't hear because she turns the water on." Sniffs. Maya's face went pale. "Ellie, what?" "You do." For one strange second, no one spoke. Julian looked at Maya then, really looked. Not as a passenger, not as an inconvenience in a delayed airport. As a young woman holding herself together with caffeine, fear, and whatever strength mothers used when there was none left. Before Maya could apologize again, a young Aurelia Air employee hurried into the lounge. His eyes widened when he recognized Julian. "Mr. Cross," he said under his breath. "Sir, the press is near gate B12. They're asking about the cancellations. If they see you here—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Julian understood. A photograph of the CEO crying while his airline collapsed into weather-related chaos would become a headline before midnight. He could stand, straighten his tie, issue a statement, become the man everyone expected. Instead, he remained seated. Ellie reached into the pocket of her yellow coat and pulled out a crumpled tissue. On one corner, a crooked red heart had been drawn in marker. "You can have this," she said. "It's mostly clean." For the first time that day, Julian almost smiled. He took the tissue carefully, as if it were something fragile and expensive. "Thank you, Ellie," Maya blinked. "How did you?" Julian glanced at the teddy bear where the name Ellie was stitched in purple thread. Then his phone buzzed again. Boston. Julian stared at the screen, the tissue still in his hand. And when the employee asked, "Sir, should I tell them you're unavailable?" Julian looked toward the snow, then toward the little girl who'd given him permission to be human. "Inhale yes," he said softly. "Tell them I'm with family." He didn't know why he said it, but for once, he didn't correct himself. Julian Cross could make his voice sound calm even when the world was burning. Maya noticed that first. While passengers paced outside the lounge and snow kept burying the runways, Julian stood near the window with his phone to his ear, speaking in low, precise sentences. "No, we do not blame the airport authority." A pause. "No, we do not release numbers until operations verifies them." Another pause. "Compensate the families with children first. Then elderly passengers. Then medical emergencies. I don't care what the automated system says. Override it." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't sigh. He didn't waste a word. To anyone else he might have sounded powerful. To Maya he sounded like a man performing surgery on himself without anesthesia. She'd seen that kind of control in emergency rooms. The father who asked about insurance before admitting he was terrified. The daughter who corrected the spelling of her mother's name while her hands shook. The people who spoke most neatly were often the ones breaking in the messiest ways. Julian ended one call and immediately answered another. "No private aircraft are cleared?" He listened. "What about Colorado Springs?" Another pause. "Then check Centennial." His jaw tightened. "I understand what closed runways mean, Aaron. I'm asking you to check again." For the first time, frustration cracked through his voice. Then he glanced toward Ellie, who was sitting cross-legged in a leather chair, feeding imaginary soup to her teddy bear. He lowered his tone. "Just call me when there is any option at all." He hung up. Maya should have looked away. Instead, she watched him press the heel of his hand against one eye, not crying now, only trying to keep something from spilling out again. All that money, all those planes with his company's name painted across their tails, and he was trapped in the same airport as everyone else. Ellie didn't understand power, but she understood sadness. That made her bolder than adults. She climbed down from the chair and approached Julian again. "Do you have kids?" she asked. "Ellie," Maya warned. Julian looked at the little girl, then shook his head. "No, do you have a wife?" Maya stood immediately. "Ellie Parker, that is not something we ask strangers." But Julian answered before Maya could pull her away. "I did," he said. "Her name was Claire." Ellie's expression changed. Children did that sometimes, wandered into deep water, then suddenly realized they couldn't touch the bottom. "Where is she?" Julian looked out at the snow. Sighs, "She died." Maya's apology caught in her throat. Ellie hugged her teddy bear tighter. For a moment she said nothing. Then, very softly, she replied, "My dad didn't die. He just stopped living with us. It still feels like a kind of gone." The words hit Julian harder than he expected. A kind of gone. That was exactly what Claire had called him once. Not dead, not cruel. Just absent in all the places where love needed a body. He could hear her voice as clearly as if she were standing beside him. "You're everywhere, Julian," Claire had said one night in their kitchen. Her coat still on, her eyes red from another dinner he'd missed. Singapore, London, New York, every conference room where someone needs you to be brilliant. But when I need you, you become a calendar notification I keep hoping won't get rescheduled. He'd told her it was temporary. He'd told her the merger mattered. He'd told her he was building something for them. Claire had smiled sadly and said, "No, you're building something to hide in." 3 weeks later, she was gone. A wet highway, a truck that slid through a red light. Claire driving to the hospital because Thomas Cross had collapsed, and Julian was in Singapore, closing the largest international partnership of his career. By the time Julian landed in Boston, Claire had already been taken off the ventilator. His father had looked at him across the hospital hallway and said only one sentence. "Inhale, she asked for you." Since then, Thomas had spoken to Julian with the politeness people reserved for strangers and enemies. A loud ringtone snapped Julian back to the lounge. Maya's phone. She looked at the screen and her face tightened before she answered. "Not now, Daniel." Ellie looked up immediately. Maya turned away, but not far enough. No, I'm not using her against you. We're flying to Boston because my father is sick. A pause, because I didn't know if you'd answer. Another pause, sharper. Don't say that. Don't you dare say I'm too unstable to take care of my own daughter. Julian looked away to give her privacy, but Ellie'd heard enough. Her small face had gone still. Maya lowered her voice, but the damage was done. I can't do this right now. I haven't slept in 30 hours, Daniel. Please, not in front of her. She ended the call and stood frozen, phone in hand. Then another call came in, the hospital where she worked. Maya stared at it, almost laughed, and rejected the call. A text appeared seconds later. Can you cover tomorrow night? We're short again. Her hand trembled around her coffee cup. Julian saw it. He said nothing. Because before anyone could say anything, Maya turned back toward Ellie's chair. It was empty. The teddy bear was gone too. For 1 second, Maya didn't understand what she was seeing. Then panic took her whole face. Ellie. She spun around. Ellie? The lounge suddenly felt too large, too crowded, too full of exits. Maya ran toward the corridor. Julian was already moving. His phone was in his hand, voice low and urgent. This is Julian Cross. I need airport security in Concourse B now. 7-year-old girl, brown hair, yellow coat, carrying a teddy bear. Lock down the lounge exits and check the restrooms. Maya stared at him, wild-eyed. She was just here. She was right here. We'll find her. You don't know that. The words struck something old and brutal inside him. No, he didn't know that. He'd once believed there would always be another flight, another call, another chance to arrive before the ending. He'd been wrong. Julian moved faster. Security began sweeping the area. A gate agent pointed toward the windows at the far end of the concourse, where a narrow viewing corner overlooked the snow-covered tarmac. Julian saw the yellow coat first. Ellie sat behind a row of charging stations, knees pulled to her chest, teddy bear pressed against her mouth. She was crying silently, the way children cried when they were trying not to be found. Julian slowed before approaching. Ellie, he said gently. She wiped her face with her sleeve, sniffs. Is Mommy going to send me to Dad because I make her tired? Julian crouched beside her, careful not to crowd her. No, she said she hasn't slept. She said not in front of me. Julian looked back. Maya had stopped a few feet away. Her hand covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't interrupt. Julian turned to Ellie again. Sometimes adults say things because they're drowning, he said quietly, not because they mean them. Ellie sniffed. Mommy's drowning? A little, Julian said. But she's still swimming toward you. Maya broke then, not loudly, not completely, but enough that her shoulders lowered as if she'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. Ellie ran to her. Maya dropped to her knees and wrapped both arms around her daughter. I am so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. Julian stood, suddenly aware of the security officers, the delayed passengers, the storm pressing against the windows. Maya looked up at him over Ellie's shoulder. For the first time she didn't see a CEO. She saw a man who knew exactly what it meant to arrive too late, and who had run this time as if he still had a chance to forgive himself. The announcement came just after midnight. A narrow weather window had opened over Denver. One Aurelia Air flight would be allowed to depart for Boston. The news moved through the terminal like a match dropped into dry grass. People stood too quickly, grabbed bags, woke sleeping children, rushed toward the gate with the desperate hope of anyone who'd been told to wait too long. Julian Cross stood near the counter while an operations manager whispered updates into his ear. We can clear you a seat in first class, the man said, or remove someone if you need privacy. Julian looked toward the boarding area. A woman in a gray sweatshirt held a toddler against her chest while her husband argued quietly with a gate agent. Beside them sat a boy of maybe 5, pale and thin, wearing a medical mask and clutching a folder from Denver Children's Hospital. Who are they? Julian asked. The manager checked the tablet. The Reeves family. Their son has a surgical consult in Boston tomorrow morning. They were booked in economy. Julian was silent for a moment. Then he said, put them in first. The manager blinked. Sir, first class, row 1 if it's open. And you? Julianson glanced at Maya and Ellie, who were standing a few feet away with their small carry-on bags. Maya looked as if she was awake only because fear had replaced sleep. I'll sit wherever there's room. It was not a grand gesture. Julian didn't feel noble. If anything, it felt embarrassingly small, like trying to return one stolen coin after robbing a bank. But for once, he didn't want to be the man who moved people out of his way simply because he could. When they boarded, the plane felt too warm and too crowded. Wet coats steamed in overhead bins. Babies fussed. Strangers helped each other lift luggage because everyone was too tired to pretend they were separate. Julian found his seat in premium economy beside Maya and Ellie. Ellie immediately climbed into the middle seat. Maya frowned. Honey, you can sit by the way. No, Ellie said, buckling herself in with great seriousness. Mr. Cross looks like he might float away if nobody holds him down. For a second, Julian didn't know what to do with that. Then Maya laughed. It was not a big laugh. It came out tired and surprised, almost against her will, but it changed her whole face. Julian saw briefly the woman she might have been before night shifts, custody arguments, hospital calls, and fear had worn her down. Ellie looked pleased with herself. Julian fastened his seatbelt. I appreciate the supervision. You're welcome, Ellie said. Adults need a lot. The plane pushed back from the gate 40 minutes later. As it rolled toward the runway, Julian looked out at the dark field of snow and runway lights. Somewhere far ahead, Boston waited. His father waited, or maybe didn't. That was the thought Julian couldn't let finish. Maya noticed his hand tighten around the armrest. Do you hate flying? She asked softly. He gave a humorless smile. I own an airline. That's not what I asked. Julian looked at her then. Inhale no, he said. I hate not being able to control where I land. Maya nodded as if she understood too well. For a while they sat in the low hum of the cabin, while Ellie leaned against her teddy bear and watched clouds swallow the window. I spend most nights in the ER, Maya said at last. People fall apart in front of me all the time. I know where to put my hands when someone's bleeding. I know what to say when a family needs to step out of the room. I can stay calm through almost anything, she swallowed. But when it's my own life, I don't know where to put anything. Julian didn't answer quickly. He respected her too much in that moment to offer something easy. After a while, he said, After Claire died, I kept her office exactly the way she left it. Maya turned slightly. At home? He nodded. Her books, her coffee mug. A blue sweater on the back of the chair. There's a voicemail from her I still haven't listened to. Why not? His eyes stayed on the seat in front of him. Inhale, because if I hear her voice, I'll know there isn't another message coming. Maya's expression softened, but she didn't pity him. That was what made it bearable. Before she could speak, the plane dropped. Hard gasp, a collective gasp shot through the cabin. Ellie grabbed Maya's sleeve. The seatbelt sign chimed above them. The captain's voice came over the speaker, steady but tense. Ladies and gentlemen, we're encountering some rough air from the storm system. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The plane lurched again. Maya wrapped one arm around Ellie. It's okay, baby, it's just turbulence. But her own face had gone pale. Julian gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles whitened. He knew the aircraft was built for this. He knew the pilots were trained. He knew every technical explanation. None of it helped. The plane dropped again and Ellie began to cry. Are we going to die? Inhale. No, Maya said quickly. No, sweetheart. Ellie twisted toward Julian, tears bright in her eyes. Sniffs, was Claire scared when she died? The question landed harder than the turbulence. Julian's breath stopped. Maya closed her eyes for half a second, pained by the innocence of it. Ellie. Julian unbuckled his seatbelt. I need to. Breathe. He started to stand, but Maya caught his wrist, not tightly, just enough. Don't disappear, she said. He looked down at her hand. Maya's voice was quiet but firm. Don't disappear just because a child asked the thing adults spend years avoiding. The plane shook again. Julian sat back down slowly. Ellie was still watching him, frightened and waiting. Inhale. He forced himself to breathe. I don't know if Claire was scared, he said. His voice cracked on her name. That's the part that hurts the most. I don't know what she felt. I don't know if she called for me. I don't know if she thought I was coming. His eyes filled, but this time he didn't turn away. I wasn't there. Maya's hand remained near his, not holding it, not claiming anything, just present. Ellie reached across her lap and took Julian's hand. Her fingers were small and warm. Maya took Ellie's other hand. The plane continued to tremble through the dark sky, but for a few minutes the three of them sat connected in a fragile human chain. They weren't family. Not really. They were a widowed man, an exhausted mother, and a little girl afraid of people vanishing. But somewhere between Denver and Boston, held together by storm, grief, and the strange bravery of telling the truth, they became something close enough. Boston didn't welcome them gently. The plane landed late, shaking once as its wheels struck the runway, the cabin filled with the tired applause of people grateful to be alive, or simply grateful to be somewhere other than the sky. Julian's phone came alive before the seatbelt sign turned off. 3 missed calls from the hospital. 1 message. Inhale, Mr. Cross, your father's condition has worsened. Please come as soon as possible. For a moment, Julian only stared at the screen. Then he stood. A black company car waited outside arrivals, engine running, hazard lights blinking through the snow. Julian could have gotten in alone. He almost did. But when he saw Maya adjusting Ellie's scarf with hands that still trembled from the flight, he stopped. Your father's hospital, he said. Is it near St. Catherine's? Maya blinked. 2 blocks away. Come with me, the roads are bad. She hesitated, pride and exhaustion fighting across her face. Then Ellie tugged her sleeve. Mommy, please. Maya nodded once. Thank you. Inside the car, Julian's phone kept buzzing. A news alert appeared on the screen. Aurelia Air CO spotted on delayed Boston flight mass cancellations. Then another. Did Julian Cross use company privilege during storm chaos? A board member called. Julian answered. Julian, we need a statement immediately, the man said. The optics are terrible. If you're seen going to a private hospital while passengers are stranded. Inhale. My father is dying. A pause. I understand that, but the company. Julian ended the call. Then he powered off the phone. Maya looked at him from the opposite seat. For once, Julian didn't explain himself. At St. Catherine's, the smell of antiseptic and old coffee hit them as soon as the doors opened. A nurse led Julian down a quiet hallway to a room lit by monitors in the blue-gray light of early morning. Thomas Cross looked smaller than Julian remembered. At 71, the former pilot still had the bones of a man who'd once commanded cockpits and crossed oceans. But now his skin seemed thin and his breath uneven, his body held in place by tubes and machines. Stepped in. For one fragile second, Julian thought his father might smile. He didn't. You made it, Thomas rasped. Julian moved closer. Dad. You always do, Thomas said. Eventually, the words landed hard. Julian swallowed. I came as fast as I could. Thomas turned his head slightly toward him. You always come after the planes landed, Julian. Never while people are still falling. Julian had spent years preparing arguments against that sentence. Weather, distance, work, timing, Claire's accident, the impossibility of knowing. None of them survived the room. Inhale. Sorry, he said, but the words came out too small, crushed beneath years of defense. Thomas closed his eyes. Claire wrote you something. Julian went still. What? I kept it. His father's voice shook, but not only from illness. I was angry. I wanted you to hurt, so I let you hurt without it. He pointed weakly toward the drawer beside the bed. Inside was an envelope, softened at the corners. Julian knew Claire's handwriting before he even touched it. His hands failed him twice before he got it open. The letter wasn't cruel. That made it worse. Claire had written that she loved him. That she saw the frightened boy beneath the polished man. That she knew he worked because stillness terrified him. But then came the line that split him open. Inhale. I'm tired, Julian, not of loving you, but of loving someone who keeps the gentlest part of himself locked away, as if tenderness were a liability. Julian sat down hard. Outside the room, Maya had returned from taking Ellie to see her grandfather. She saw Julian through the glass wall, bent over the letter like a man reading his own sentence. She didn't enter. When Julian stepped into the hallway minutes later, he looked lost. Maya stood beside him. In the ear, she said quietly, I've seen a lot of people wait for the perfect sentence. He looked at her. Sniffs. They usually run out of time. Julian turned back toward the door. Then the monitors screamed. A harsh rising alarm filled the room. Nurses rushed past him. A doctor shouted orders. Julian stepped forward, but someone pushed him back. Sir, you need to wait outside. No, I need to. The door closed in his face. Just like before. A hallway. A hospital room. People moving quickly behind glass. Someone he loved on the other side of a door he couldn't open. Julian struck the wall with the heel of his hand. Once. Again, his breath broke. The CEO of Aurelia Air, the man who could calm shareholders and command fleets, folded in the middle of the hospital corridor and cried where everyone could see him. Maya stood a few feet away, holding Ellie close. Ellie looked up at her mother, frightened and tender. So grown-ups are allowed? She whispered. Maya brushed a hand over her daughter's hair. Yes, she said, especially when they loved someone. Thomas survived the night, barely. By morning he lay in a medically induced coma, his chest rising and falling with the help of machines. The doctor spoke gently, which Julian had learned was the language people used when hope had been reduced to a polite shape. We need to prepare for every possibility, she said. Julian nodded as if he understood, as if understanding changed anything. He spent the next hours beside his father's bed, still wearing yesterday's suit, Claire's letter folded in his jacket pocket like something alive. Every few minutes he looked at Thomas and tried to think of the right words. None came. By noon, the video had spread. Someone in the hospital corridor had filmed Julian breaking down outside Thomas's room. The clip was everywhere now. Some people mocked him for losing control. Others called it human. The board called it dangerous. His assistant arrived with a fresh shirt, a dark tie, and a prepared statement. "The interview is in 40 minutes, she said carefully. "The board thinks you should define the narrative before someone else does." Julian took the tie. For a moment, he almost became himself again. Then Maya appeared in the doorway, Ellie asleep against her side. "You're going to turn grief into a press release?" Maya asked. Julian's face hardened. "I've thousands of employees depending on me, and none of them need you to perform heartbreak on television. You don't understand the pressure." Maya's eyes flashed. "I'm an ER nurse, Julian. I understand being needed until there's nothing left of you." The words hung between them. From Maya's side, Ellie opened one sleepy eye. "Grown-ups always ruin things right when they start liking each other," she mumbled. Neither Julian nor Maya knew what to say. Then Maya's phone rang. Daniel. She stepped into the hall, but Julian heard enough. "A few months," Maya whispered. "No. You can't just take Ellie because you think I'm unstable." Her face changed. Fear stripped away every defense. Minutes later, Julian saw her near the elevator, coat on, Ellie's bag over one shoulder. "You were leaving?" he asked. "I have to fix my own life. I can help. I know the best family attorneys in Boston." Maya turned on him, wounded and furious. "I don't need a powerful man to rescue me." Breathe. Julian stopped. The old instinct in him, the one that turned love into logistics, fell silent. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." Maya blinked. Julian stepped closer, but not too close. "I don't want to save you," he said quietly. "I just don't know how to stand beside someone without turning it into a plan." Maya's anger collapsed into tears. "I don't know how to be loved without feeling like I owe something." The hospital speaker called for a doctor. Snow tapped softly against the glass doors. Around them, people kept arriving, leaving, surviving. Julian didn't touch her. "Not yet. Can I sit with you for a few minutes?" he asked. Maya looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. They sat together in the lobby, saying almost nothing. Later, Julian canceled the interview. Instead, he recorded a short message for Aurelia Air employees. He admitted the storm response hadn't been good enough. He thanked the gate agents, crews, mechanics, and call center workers who'd carried the worst of the anger. Then he looked into the camera and said, "My father is critically ill. Today, I'm choosing to be with him. No polish, no performance, just the truth." Thomas woke 3 days later, not fully, not brightly. He opened his eyes as if returning from somewhere far away and not entirely willingly. Julian was sitting beside the bed, unshaven, still in the same hospital chair, Claire's letter folded and unfolded so many times the paper softened at the creases. For a while, neither man spoke. Then Thomas turned his head slightly. "Sniffs, I blamed you," he said, his voice thin as thread. Julian leaned closer. "I know. I blamed you for Claire." Thomas closed his eyes, because blaming you was easier than admitting I couldn't save her either. The room went quiet except for the machines. Julian imagined this conversation 1,000 times. In some versions, he shouted. In others, his father begged forgiveness. But real life was smaller than imagination, less satisfying, more honest. Thomas lifted a weak hand. Julian took it. There was no dramatic embrace, no perfect apology, just an old man and his son sitting with the damage neither of them could undo. That evening, Julian finally listened to Claire's last voicemail. Her voice filled the empty hospital chapel from his phone speaker, soft and familiar enough to hurt. "Jules, I know you're busy," she said, with a small, tired laugh. "You're always busy. I just hope one day you stop confusing responsibility with love. Love doesn't always arrive on time. But when it arrives late, it has to be brave enough to stay." Julian pressed the phone to his forehead and let the silence after her voice remain. Across town, Maya did something that felt almost as frightening. She said no. When the hospital called asking her to cover another overnight shift, she looked at Ellie asleep on the couch with her teddy bear tucked beneath her chin and said, "I can't this week." Then she called Daniel. She didn't beg, she didn't shout, she didn't offer her exhaustion as proof that she was a good mother. "We need to talk," she said. "Not to win. For Ellie, it wasn't a victory, but it was a beginning." The next morning, Ellie insisted on mailing Julian a card. On the front, she'd drawn a crooked airplane with 3 stick figures in the windows. Inside, she wrote, "Dear Mr. Cross, grown-ups are allowed to cry in public, but they should bring tissues." Julian laughed when he read it. A real laugh, the kind that surprised him. Weeks later, at another airport, Maya saw him before Ellie did. Julian stood near a gate in a dark coat, looking thinner, tired, and somehow more human. Thomas was recovering slowly. Aurelia Air was still answering for the storm. Maya's life was still complicated. Daniel hadn't become easy. Nothing had magically healed. But when Julian saw her in, he smiled. Ellie ran to him first. "Did you bring tissues to Teat? 2 packs, chuckle." Maya laughed softly. Julian looked at her. "When things get less chaotic, could I take you for coffee?" Maya tilted her head. "My life's never been less chaotic, but coffee's possible." Chuckle. "Only if nobody cries into the muffins," Ellie added. This time all 3 of them laughed. Outside the window, a plane began to roll toward the runway. Julian watched it move, not the way he used to. Not as proof of power, not as something to command, just as a simple human thing. People left, people returned, people missed flights, changed gates, arrived late, and cried in public. Sometimes, if they were lucky, they found someone willing to sit beside them while they waited to take off. If I were Julian, I think I'd have spent years believing that control was the same thing as love. I'd have told myself that working harder meant caring more. That providing for people meant being present for them. That if I could keep the planes moving, the company stable, and the headlines clean, then somehow I was doing enough. But if I were standing in that hospital hallway, holding Claire's letter, hearing my father breathe through machines, I hope I'd finally understand something Julian almost learned too late. Inhale. Sometimes the people we love don't need us to fix the weather. They just need us to sit beside them in the storm. If I were Maya, I think I'd have been terrified to let anyone help me. Because when you've spent years being the strong one, kindness can feel dangerous. Support can feel like debt. Love can feel like another thing you might fail at. But maybe Maya's bravest choice wasn't falling in love with Julian. Maybe it was admitting that she was tired. Maybe it was saying no to another shift, facing Daniel without begging, and letting Ellie see that a good mother isn't a mother who never breaks. A good mother is one who comes back, apologizes, and keeps choosing her child with an honest heart. And if I were Ellie, maybe I'd ask the question adults are too proud to ask: are we allowed to cry where people can see us? Because maybe the answer is yes. Yes, when grief is too heavy. Yes, when love arrives too late. Yes, when we've been pretending to be fine for so long that even our silence is exhausted. So let me ask you, if you were Julian, would you have chosen the interview to protect your company, or the hospital room to stay beside your father? If you were Maya, would you have accepted help from someone like Julian, or would you have walked away to protect your pride? And have you ever had a moment when a child, a stranger, or one simple question made you face a truth you'd been avoiding for years? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to know what you'd have done. And if this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for more emotional stories about love, loss, forgiveness, and the quiet moments that change a life. This is Soul Stirring Stories. Until next time, remember, sometimes healing doesn't begin when someone saves us. Inhale. Sometimes it begins when someone simply sits beside us and says, "You don't have to be strong alone."